The Jungle Cruise is the long-awaited feature film adaptation of the beloved and classic Disney ride, and it's a surprising action-adventure movie altogether. It certainly owes a lot from previous action-adventure movies like the Mummy franchise, Indiana Jones, Romancing the Stone, but it's surprising in how well it pays tribute to its source material while also crafting a pretty good and engaging action story. Directed by Jaume Collet-Serra, whose filmography is pretty interesting when compared to this. The movie follows Frank Wolf, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who is a skipper in the Amazon for a jungle cruise, who takes on escorting Dr. Lily Houghton and her brother McGregor, who are played by Emily Blunt and Jack Whitehall, as they're looking for a fabled tree of life, if you will. Um, Emily Blunt's character is convinced she knows the way to it, and The Rock's character, Frank Wolf, is dead set on going any further than he absolutely has to, and trying to just con them out of their money and into turning back before things get too far out of hand. Pursuing the three of them is the German Prince Joachim, played by Jesse Plemons, and it all adds up to a really surprising, fun movie. You have some other really good side performances in there as well. In particular, Paul Giamatti as Nilo, who owns the harbor where Frank docks his boat, and like also runs like the rival Jungle Cruise company. And like you do not get enough Giamatti for the heat that he is throwing in this performance. And Jesse Plemons too is incredible. So much better than he needs to be for this type of movie, than he should be for this type of performance. And you know, the two of them in particular are these really fun, memorable supporting characters that we just unfortunately don't get enough of. But it's also to be expected in a big movie like this, where you know all the focus really is on Emily Blunt and The Rock, and their chemistry is basically as advertised. A lot of early reviews said that, you know, the chemistry elevates the film. And in a lot of ways, I do agree. I think it's a good movie on its own. Just on, you know, storytelling, setup, the way it pays tribute to the Jungle Cruise ride, whether it's locations, some of the jokes or puns that the skippers make when you take the ride. It's clear that a lot of thought and a lot of care went into making this movie as true to the spirit of the ride as possible, which is kind of a crazy thing to say. You know, like it would have been so easy to just slap the name Jungle Cruise on this and call it a day. But fortunately, there's a lot more going on than that. I think it's going to be one that's really fun to rewatch. And, you know, on top of all of that, those lead performances are amazing. I described it to a friend as it's the Mummy, where it's The Rock instead of Brendan Fraser, and Emily Blunt is Indiana Jones. Because that's something this movie does really well, which is not fall into the same trap of damsel in distress in this type of action adventure movie. Like Emily Blunt is, I think, personally, arguably the most versatile actress working today, and I think having her there elevated the performance of The Rock, who, you know, he's a strong actor, he's a charismatic actor, but like a lot of his characters depend on that charisma and that natural rock charm. So you get a little bit more out of the performance here, I thought, and I feel like that's probably because you have someone of Emily Blunt's caliber acting across from him. And Jack Whitehall too, as the brother McGregor. Like that's a thankless part in a movie with two megastars like that, and he manages to carve himself some really good scenes, including one scene that, you know, could easily have been more pandering that Disney has done to the LGBTQ community. And instead, it's like a nice, quiet moment that is well handled in the middle of all of these crazy action sequences. Which brings me to Collet-Serra, whose previous filmography is really interesting for you know, being handed a big budget Disney movie like this. Like he was in horror for a long time, directing The Shallows and Orphan, and he directed a slew of Liam Neeson movies as well in the later action years of Liam Neeson's career. So those kind of come in handy here because his set pieces and his action sequences are very well staged and well executed. And that's something that I thought really set it apart from, those movies that it is pulling its influences from. I think the only real negatives that I can think of are the runtime. It's a little long. It's just over 2 hours and 10 minutes, which is a little long and does make for some pacing issues. I think the first half of this movie is a little bit better and flows a lot nicer than the second half. I think the biggest critique I had is that I didn't really think that the supernatural element with the curse and with Edgar Ramirez's character Aguirre was necessary. Like, I thought Jesse Plemons was incredible as the villain. And if the movie just focused on him chasing after them with like a light supernatural references or something, like that would have been enough for me. It felt like a lot of stuff got cut out for the sake of making room for this supernatural element. And that kind of started to feel a lot like the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. That's the only time really that it was kind of like, oh, well, it's a bummer that we're launching into this subplot so late in the game here. And we have such strong main performances, like cutting out those scenes and making for, 2 or 3 more Jesse Plemons moments with the rest of the cast would have probably been just as enjoyable. The last thing that I really want to talk about is I'm curious to see what's going to happen going forward. It's like the movie doesn't seem well opened for a sequel or a franchise, but with the names involved and the amount of money that went into it and what is sure to be the amount of success that it's going to have, whether at the box office or doing the Disney premiere plus at-home releases, it's going to be a success. I'm going to give Jungle Cruise a B+ and say that's just short of an A, just for those things that I mentioned, the extended runtime, kind of a little bit of unnecessary add-on stuff, but really that's just nitpicking. I know I'm biased because I am a massive fan of The Rock. I can basically tell you he's going to be in a movie, I'm going to see the movie, and I'm going to react favorably to it because he's The Rock. And I've watched him, whether in movies or wrestling, for basically the better part of 20 plus years of my life. He has been a central figure. So I can't not support anything he does. So there's bias here, but I do promise that looking through a actual critical lens, this was a really fun movie that I enjoyed a whole lot, that really hit a genre that we don't get a lot of, which is like that throwback action adventure. And it did the rare feat of adapting a Disney ride into a very entertaining and enjoyable standalone film. I know people that have not ridden the Jungle Cruise ever that enjoyed the movie, and I know people that have already made lists of like 1,000 Easter eggs that the movie made to the ride. Please let me know your thoughts on the movie in the comment section, or what ride you think Disney might try to make a live action movie out of next. Thank you for watching, and I will be back soon.